Next on PIJN News, Dr. Chaps reports on these important issues.
Is the United Nations infringing on American society? What is Agenda 21? What about all these trade deals happening in Washington and the Article 5 convention? We're going to interview John McManus, president of the John Birch Society.
Former Navy chaplain Gordon James Klingenschmitt took a stand to defend religious freedom by daring to pray publicly in Jesus' name. Now he helps you by reporting the news, discerning the spirits, and praying the scriptures. Would you pray with us? Here's Dr. Chaps.
God bless you in Jesus' name. My name is Chaplain Gordon James Klingenschmitt, Dr. Chaps, and you're watching PIJN News. On this show, we normally like to report the news, discern the spirits, and pray the scriptures. But today we have a special guest here for part 2 of our interview. I'm joined by John McManus, president of the John Birch Society. Welcome back to the program, sir.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So, in the last show, we gave a historical entree, I suppose, of your history with the John Birch Society. You've now been president for 24 years. Talk just briefly, in case somebody didn't see that show, what is the John Birch Society?
John Birch Society is a citizen education program whose motto says what we are after, and that is less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. We believe that combination would lead to a better world. How much less government? The amount in the Constitution of the United States. If the Constitution were fully enforced, the federal government would be 20% its size, 20% its cost. And that would be wonderful, all right? The more responsibility, where do we turn for that? We go to the 10 Commandments. And if people would abide by the 10 Commandments, it would be, with God's help, it would be a better world. So that's what we're all about in the John Birch Society.
So you have chapters around the country in all 50 states, and you have historically defended the Constitution, defended the Declaration of Independence, patriotism, God and country, the Constitution. Talk for a minute about Agenda 21. We've seen this infringement, perhaps, and it's been creeping over the past several decades, of the United Nations influencing American sovereignty, and that is one of your cornerstone issues that you're fighting against.
That's right. Well, let's start by realizing that the United Nations Charter says that it shall have nothing to say about the domestic issues in any country. Agenda 21 is all about the domestic issues in the United States and any other country where Agenda 21 is being implemented. So the leaders of the United Nations don't even obey their own charter. And there are other parts of it that are equally egregious violations of their own charter. So Agenda 21 is really essentially an attack on property rights and on personal freedom. It's a 1,000-page booklet, and all you need to do is to read the foreword written by a pro-Agenda 21 lawyer named Sitarz, S-I-T-A-R-Z, who talks about it becoming a new way of everybody living and operating that will change everybody's life and so forth. And it is. Agenda 21 is exactly that. That's what it intends to do. And it intends to have the United Nations end up as the ruler of everybody.
So this is a 1,000-page document written by UN officials describing their agenda for the 21st century.
That's what the 21 is. That's right.
And they called it that. That's not a label that we came up with.
No.
But you wrote, or you produced, or John Birch Society created a film exposing this. Talk about your work.
Well, we've written articles about it, published them. We have reprints from articles from our magazine. We've had DVDs on the subject. And we've reached a lot of people to the effect that in some areas of the country, communities that had been enticed into joining the Agenda 21 program, usually not talked about as Agenda 21, something else, sustainable development or some environmental type name. We've persuaded a lot of communities to get out of it and have these UN stealth operators who come into your community, never tell you that they're working for the United Nations, and get out of here. We don't want you. We don't want your program, and so forth. So we've accomplished drawing it back, and we've also accomplished stopping it from growing even more so. And it's one of our victories in the John Birch Society. But of course, the real victory will come when we persuade the U.S. Congress to get us out of the United Nations totally.
Total withdrawal from the United Nations. Now, as you said, the UN has a charter. They were chartered to be a peaceful forum where countries can negotiate with each other.
The first article in the UN Charter mentions the word peace 6 times. Article 2 talks about how they can go to war. So the peace organization, see, they always refer to Article 1 and say, we're a peace organization. See, peace, peace, peace in our Article number 1. But Article 2 talks about how they can go to war. But one of the key parts of it is Article 25, just one sentence, one small sentence. It says the members of the United Nations agree to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council of the United Nations. That trumps the Constitution. That any senator would have agreed to that in 1945 and place us in the United Nations is an indictment of that senator.
Well, our own Constitution does provide for foreign treaties, which sometimes have the weight and must be enforced after they're confirmed by 2/3 of the Senate, as if they have the same weight as the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, but a treaty is an agreement between 2 existing entities, right? Agreeing to the UN Charter when there wasn't any UN to agree to, it's not a treaty. It couldn't be a treaty because certainly the UN wasn't a country that we could have a treaty with, right? But they said, well, all we need is 2/3 of the Senate and we're in the UN.
And now they're infringing on our domestic rights here in America.
Domestic rights are being infringed on all the time. The UN has opposed our capital punishment. The UN has opposed our abortion restrictions where they exist. The UN has stopped a gold mine up in Montana. The UN, it's all over the place.
And they're re-educating our children, or they have an education.
Oh, the UN is wonderful. The schools talk about the UN being wonderful. Yeah. When the vote in the Senate was taken in 1945, there were 89 senators who voted yes. Only 2 said no.
Well, I mean, it would be.
I was aware of that. I was living it during that period, and I remember my own dad saying, who was a very patriotic American, saying, "We got to do something different. We had World War I, we had World War II, we don't want World War III, let's give it a try." And that's the way it was sold. It was sold that way to the senators, it was sold that way to the American people. And even Robert Taft, a great senator from Ohio, he voted for the UN, and within a couple of years he was talking about, get us out. I made a mistake. The UN is a trap, let's go it alone, he said.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so, so then we went to war in Korea under the United Nations. They made sure we didn't win. The war in Korea, the shooting stopped in 1953 after 3 years, but there are still tens of thousands of American troops in South Korea under UN command.
Even today.
Even today.
Hold that thought. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to see how that translates into American trade policy.
This is PIJN News, defending your religious freedom. Dr. Chaps will be right back.
Do you care about defending religious liberty? I know you do. And that's why I'm asking you to take action today. Don't just sit there, but do something. Visit our website, prayinjesusname.org, and sign a petition that we'll fax to Congress on your behalf. In fact, there are 3 specific petitions I want you to sign to defend military chaplains who are under fire. The first is to support H.R. 343. This is a bill introduced in Congress by my friend, Congressman Walter Jones of North Carolina, to protect free speech for military chaplains who are sometimes punished if they use the word Jesus in their prayers. Well, if you know my story, you know that I was punished in 2006, even at court-martial, because I used the word Jesus in my prayers in uniform in front of the White House. Well, I was later vindicated by Congress, who said it's okay for me to do that. But did you know 65 other chaplains are now suing the Navy? I was not the only person. Our second petition I want you to sign is to protect military chapel buildings, which are being desecrated. Christian altars, Catholic or Protestant, are being desecrated by homosexual wedding ceremonies in all 50 states under this order by the Obama administration. Well, that deprives all of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines of a sacred worship space which ought to be protected. And instead, they're going to punish the chaplain if he won't turn over the keys to his chapel. Here's another petition I want you to sign, and this is to stop threatening court-martial for troops who talk about Jesus. Even recently, the Pentagon is saying, oh, we're going to threaten you with crime of proselytizing. No, that's not right. Any soldier ought to be able to talk about his or her faith in Jesus Christ and to have that same religious freedom of speech that we sacrifice to give for others. When you sign these petitions, we will fax them to Congress, and it's free. I want you to take action today. Sign these 3 important petitions at prayinjesusname.org. Go there today.
Empowering you, the grassroots activist. Here is Dr. Chaps.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. Chaps. I'm joined again by the president of the John Birch Society, my new friend, John McManus. Welcome back to the program, sir.
Thank you.
So we were talking about the United Nations Charter, how that's, had mission creep. There's been an evolution into taking on America's domestic agenda, infringing on American sovereignty. But in recent months, there have been debates in the United States Senate about these trade bills, trading with Europe or trading with Asia. Talk about your position on that.
Well, these trade agreements are similar to what happened to the European nations that joined the European Union. When they signed on to the trade agreement, it was called the Common Market. And then it was called the European Common Market. And then it was called the European Union. And what had happened is the nations that thought they were joining a trade agreement to have jobs and employment and friendship among nations and so forth, found out that they had traded their sovereignty away to the Union in Brussels, Belgium, which is the headquarters of the European Union. And there have been many Europeans who have spoken out now about the fact that they were deceived. Well, right now, the United States Senate is involved in an agreement, a trade agreement, which is very similar to what happened in Europe, but starting out as a trade agreement with 11 nations in the Pacific. Right? It's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Right? And then another one, the Trade and Investment Partnership with the European Union. And if the United States Senate goes ahead and approves these, well, they already have. If the Congress now, the House goes along and approves these, the United States will be entering into partnerships with these nations that we shouldn't do. The great leader of our country, the first, George Washington, talked about beware of entangling alliances. Commerce with all, entangling alliances with none. And that's good sense. So well,
the distinction is that it's good to trade with foreign countries as long as there's reciprocity and they're not taking advantage of us like China does. But these agreements go further than that. They kind of bind American sovereignty, just one example, in the trade courts. So when there's a trade dispute, it's not American law that prevails, it's this international law.
They have tribunals, and we found that out with NAFTA. NAFTA was a trade agreement, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and they had a NAFTA tribunal that supersedes all of the court decisions that might come out of the United States. So if a Canadian firm has a problem with an American firm, it doesn't go to an American court, it goes to this NAFTA court. And when they first started using this NAFTA tribunal, there were people, even senators. Senator John Kerry, for instance, says, well, if we'd known about that, we never would have voted for it. It was his duty to know about that, right?
And now he knows about it, and he's promoting the same thing with the Pacific.
Now he's the Secretary of State. Yeah, good luck to us. Right? But anyhow, the European Union is possibly disintegrating, and I think it would be a good thing. There was a wonderful book put out by 2 Englishmen who studied this thing right from the start, and they talked about a 6-nation consortium that began trade, and then it became the Common Market, and then it became the European Common Market, and so forth. And they called the book The Great Deception. They called it one of the greatest coups d'etats in all of history, where people had given up their sovereignty. And now our senators, our Congress is ready to do the same thing, and President Obama is pushing it like crazy, and the John Birch Society is saying, hey, stop, back up, take a look. Look at what happened in Europe. We don't want that to happen to us. Let's not do this.
So the European Union actually combined all of their currencies, the euro, for example, and now we've seen how Germany has really been taking advantage of Greece all these years.
No, Germany's bailing out Greece.
Maybe it's the other way around.
No, the people who are being affected by that are the Germans. The Germans are being forced by the European Union to bail out Greece.
And if America was sort of forced to join the European Union, I guess we'd be paying for all of their debt.
That's right, precisely. And it's another Ponzi scheme. It's another terrible thing that we should never get involved in. The European Union is, according to Mikhail Gorbachev, the new European Soviet. He actually said that when he was visiting one time in England. He probably regrets having put it that way, but it's absolutely true. And what is a Soviet but a consortium of groups of nations? Right?
So talk about foreign aid, like in the Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is being sort of the regional bully. What should the U.S. Congress do?
Well, the U.S. Congress should obey the Constitution, and if they did, they would never find any place in the Constitution for foreign aid. Foreign aid should be abolished tomorrow. We have given away trillions of dollars, and we continue to do so. We are now the largest debtor nation in the history of mankind. We owe $18 trillion that they admit to, but they don't admit to the unfunded obligations that we have in Social Security and medical care and some other things where there's no money at all, and those are requirements that they would have to pay out. So the United States is killing itself with debt, and we still give away money. I went to a fifth grader one time and I said, if you're heavily in debt, should you give away money? And he looked at me and he said, of course not. I said, how would you like to be a senator?
Maybe we could elect him. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, one more segment with John McManus about the Article 5 Convention of the States possibility coming up right after this.
Giving you a megaphone in Washington, D.C. Dr. Chaps will be right back.
Do you care about defending the Constitution? Sign a petition today to defend your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. You know, left-wing crazies go on these shooting sprees, but then the Democrats, like Joseph Biden, are using this as a pretext to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. Can you believe they literally want to publish the mental health records of military veterans so that they don't pass background checks so they can't exercise their rights when they come home? Senator Harry Reid, the leader, changed the filibuster rules. Why? So he could stack the courts with gun-grabbing judges. Here are three of President Obama's nominees. Pillard, Millett, and Wilkins couldn't get confirmed, but now they're on the court, and they're allowing the D.C. police to fingerprint all law-abiding gun owners? That's not right. Sign a petition today. Defend your Second Amendment rights. Visit PrayInJesusName.org. Again, that's PrayInJesusName.org. Do you care about defending the Second Amendment? Are the Democrats trying to seize your guns? Sign a petition today at PrayInJesusName.org. Democrat Senator Dianne Feinstein actually believes that stickers on windows and gun-free zones are going to make your lifesaver. That's really not true. We also know that Congresswoman Diane DeGette has confused magazines with bullets and is trying to ban both of those with these stricter gun control laws. But the Colorado sheriffs believe this is unconstitutional. And not only that, it's unsafe. A recent Harvard study shows that more guns actually results in less murders and less violence. And look what happened in England. Violence there soared after they banned guns, but here in America, violence dropped by 30% with more gun buying. Why is the government the only ones allowed to have billions of rounds of ammunition? I think we should defend your constitutional rights. Sign a petition today at PrayInJesusName.org. Again, that's PrayInJesusName.org.
He is the intersection of church and state. Here is Dr. Chaps.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. Chaps. We're joined again by John McManus, president of John Birch Society. There is a crisis in America. You talk about the debt problem. You talk about not giving money to others when we still have to pay our own debts. And yet, one of the groups that are trying to solve this want to propose a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States. They want to use one of the vehicles that is in the Constitution. Article 5 of the Constitution gives states the power to call for a convention of the states.
No, Congress.
Gives Congress the power?
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm misinformed, but there's a lot of state representatives out there trying to amend the Constitution. Are they doing it the wrong way?
Well, yes. We have 27 amendments to the Constitution. The first 10, of course, are the Bill of Rights, which I consider part of the original document, so that there's really only 17. And then we had Prohibition and then canceled Prohibition, so then we're down to 15. 15 amendments in 30, 40 years. Pretty good Constitution to start with, right?
Right.
But the Constitution does allow for a constitutional convention. There's been one constitutional convention in the history of our country, and it was at the end of the Articles of Confederation. War had been won. We fought it under the Articles. The Articles weren't working. They were weak. And so they decided to get together and have a constitutional convention under the Articles of Confederation.
In 1789, they adopted.
In 1787, they did this,
right.
And the mandate was to amend the Articles of Confederation. But a constitutional convention has no limitations. A constitutional convention is essentially a sovereign body, can do whatever it wants. So our founding fathers in 1787 at the Philadelphia Convention decided to scrap the Articles of Confederation. They didn't amend them. They got rid of them and started with a clean slate, and they produced the Constitution of the United States.
Ratified in 1791.
It was fully ratified by then, but enough states had ratified it in 1789, so they started getting together to form a government and so on. But the point is this, that a constitutional convention cannot be limited. Now, most of the people who are in favor of this want a balanced budget amendment. I want a balanced budget, too. But a balanced budget amendment, all the proposals that I've seen, they all have great big loopholes. For instance, 60% can override it. Secondly, if we have a national emergency, it can be overridden. We live under 10 national emergencies right now. Right? Thirdly, there's no doing away with off-budget. Put some items on off-budget. Social Security is not on the budget. That's off-budget. That's one of the biggest expenses of the United States government. Right? So a balanced budget amendment under one of these procedures isn't going to balance any budget at all.
Well, the people I'm talking to that are in favor of Article 5 convention are saying it's not a constitutional convention. We're not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Instead, they call it a convention of the states to amend the Constitution for example, term limits or a balanced budget amendment, very limited in scope. What do you say?
What they do is they point to Article 5, and there's no mention of a conference of the states. What there is in Article 5 is a constitutional convention. So what they're talking about is the same thing I'm talking about, except they put a different name under it and say it has different rules. No, not at all.
What if they set up the rules ahead of time and there was a compact among the states where they all agreed and said, no, we're only going to follow these rules before we have that meeting?
No, they can't do that. I mean, the Constitution doesn't allow for that. The constitutional, Article 5 allows for a constitutional convention. All right, now who will set the rules for the Constitutional Convention if they ever have one? It would be set by Congress, right? And who would be the delegates that go to it? And who would pay them? And who would safeguard them? And who would give them their expense money? And who would do this? All of this has to be thought out ahead of time. And nobody wants to even talk about these kinds of things.
Well, the state legislators are saying, no, we're going to do all that. We're not going to let Congress set the rules. We're going to, for example, enforce one vote for one state. Is that enforceable?
No, that's not what a constitutional convention. A constitutional convention will set its own rules once it gets started, with Congress having the role in it that Congress is supposed to have. So a lot of these things, they're kind of blue sky, and they're well intentioned, and I don't accuse any of the people who favor these kinds of things of anything other than not thinking it through enough. If they thought it through enough, they would realize that what happened in 1787, when the Articles of Confederation were supposed to be amended but were canceled, can happen again. And there are people secretly working behind the scenes. They want to get rid of the Second Amendment. They want to get rid of a lot of other limitations on the federal government that are in the Constitution today. They want to empower the executive branch even more so than it is, and so on. And that's what they want, but they don't say that. They want to have a constitutional convention, and so we're warning people, no. The best thing to do would be not. James Madison at one point said, having witnessed what happened at the first Constitutional Convention to amend, excuse me, to amend the Articles, I tremble at the thought of a second.
There is an argument being made, and we can't trust Congress anymore. The federal government is run wild. Congress is out of control. It's up to the states to try to rein that in. The states now, in their various state legislatures, are coming up with different ideas for how to rein in the federal government. Are you saying that's procedurally impossible now?
No, I'm saying good, do it. It's a process called nullification.
What is that?
Nullification is people saying, no, I don't care that you passed this law, we're not going to obey it. Has that ever, excuse me, has that ever been done in the United States? Yes. You can remember a couple of years ago we had a Real ID Act passed by the federal government requiring all the states to issue more papers for people to have an identification. Right? You're going to have something new and something different. And the state's supposed to pay for it. The states said, no, we don't have a real ID, right? We
There
have
you go.
in Indiana right now.
Or if we won't do Obamacare, then it won't happen in the states.
That's right, nullification. There's a great book that's been written by a good friend of mine named Tom Woods. Tom was a Harvard graduate, by the way, great conservative, good American. He came out of Harvard, but he wrote a book called Nullification, and he talks about it having been used over the period of the 200 years of our country and how it should be used today. And we're in favor of that. Bills of nullification would put a stop to a lot of the federal government's activities.
We have just about 10 seconds left. Mention your website. How do people join the John Birch Society?
Contact us, jbs.org or 1-800-JBS-USA1. We're glad to hear from anybody.
Our guest has been John McManus, president of the John Birch Society. I'm Dr. Chaps. This is PIJN News. Please call our prayer line at 866-OBEY-GOD. If we can pray for you, 866-OBEYGOD. We'll see you next time.
Chaplain Klingenschmitt is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy who earned his Ph.D. in theology from Regent University. As a former Navy chaplain, by taking a public stand for freedom of speech and religious expression, and by sacrificing his own 16-year career and $1 million pension, he was vindicated by the U.S. Congress, who changed the law and restored freedom for military chaplains to pray in Jesus' name. Dr. Chaps not only defended the Constitution, but his petitions have helped change the law in 10 states, restoring freedom to pray in Jesus' name. Dr. Chaps needs your financial support to stay on the air. Would you please send your best donation today? Please visit prayinjesusname.org to donate online. Or you can mail a check to Pray in Jesus Name Ministries, Post Office Box 77077, Colorado Springs, Colorado 80970. You can also call us toll-free right now at 866-OBEY-GOD. That's 866-OBEYGOD. Please sign up for our free emails at prayinjesusname.org. Again, that's prayinjesusname.org.